Well, we are diving back into the old abandoned FC. Last time we got the old iron block 5.3 pulled out for two reasons. Reason number one, bone stock 5.3 making a whopping 250 wheel. Not quite enough for this car. This car is actually pretty light. It weighed 2,700 with that engine, but you can fit a pretty big tire on it, and it needed a little more or less. But the main reason was because it was incredibly low on oil pressure. It needed to be replaced or checked out or fixed one way or another. So we got it out, dove into it. Turns out it was a faulty cam bearing. So we had a cam bearing go out, that caused a drop in oil pressure. Good to know. But regardless of that, we were replacing it with this 5.3. So this is the aluminum block L33 5.3 that came out of my LS Miata. I put a 6.2 aluminum block in that car. So I had this sitting here. It has been a stout motor. I had it for almost 2 years, beat the crap out of it, never gave me a single hiccup. So it's 10.1 to 1 compression, good 799 heads. The heads have been redone, cam, valve springs, trunnion upgrade. It's a stout little ripper, made 350 wheel on E85, so it's really the perfect candidate for this car. So we've got the last couple things we need to assemble that engine and get it in the car. That's what we're doing. So I had to switch over these main cap bolts to these ones that I pulled out of that iron block with studs. The studs have been cut off because in the Miata, I have a dry sump and the dry sump pan is flat all the way across, so the studs would hit. And since it's a dry sump, you don't need a windage tray because there's no windage because the oil isn't stored in the pan. On this motor, we're doing a wet sump, we need a windage tray, we need the studs. So I had to swap them over one by one, but we did everything proper, 15 foot-pounds, 80 degrees. It's nice to have two torque wrenches. You don't have to keep changing the numbers on every one. So with that done, we can move on to the normal stuff. So another thing we have to do, since this engine had a dry sump on it in my Miata, is put an oil pump on it. It has no oil pump at all. So we have this Moen high pressure pump. You don't want to mess around with the high volume pumps because they'll suck the pan dry and then starve your engine of oil. But it seems like people have pretty good luck with the high pressure pumps. So we went with one of those, slap that on, and then we can start putting everything back together. Alright, so we got to leave the timing cover loose until we put the crank pulley on because it centers around the crank pulley. So we'll do that next. Use the old Matt Happel Sloppy Mechanics crank pulley install method. Works like a champ. Didn't work.
Damn it. First.
All right, well, second time was the charm on that one. Got it on. I still had to drive it in a little with the bolt. I've never had that happen before. I've never had so much trouble getting one of these on. I heated it up a lot more than I normally do. Normally hit it with the MAP gas for, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 seconds. Pops right on. It goes all the way on. You hear it like snap as it cools down when it hits the cold crank. But I don't know. This one just wasn't having it. But anyway, it's time to torque it down. Gotta put our pry bar in here. I guess we'll go from this side. I always feel sketchy doing that on the stand because you feel like you're just gonna snap the end of the stand off. And you gotta, these are 240 foot-pounds. It's pretty wild. All right, we can go ahead and tighten down our timing cover now. Trying to make sure it's even at the bottom. All right. The next time I put a crank pulley on like that, I wanna temp gun it and just kind of see what temp it takes to get it on. Because I remember the first time I did it, everyone lost their minds. Like, you're gonna burn the seal out of the front of your motor. What are you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. never leaked. It was just funny. It's like people seem to forget that these things run with like 250, 260 degree oil temp plus, you know, up to 300 if it's having a problem. And the seal doesn't melt out then. We gotta clean this gasket surface up and start getting our oil pan installed. Let me make sure I got this level. Yeah, perfect. So one thing I'm particular about when it comes to slapping an engine together is gasket surfaces. I don't like leaks. Everything else, I'm more of a send it, it'll be fine kind of guy. We've all got that one thing. So what this is, instead of having a normal windage tray, which is what, you know, prevents the oil from flopping up, splashing up into the crank, it is a windage tray, but it's also a crank scraper. So basically what it does is, as the crank spins around, it scrapes the oil off the crank. It doesn't actually touch it. We set basically a specified gap. But anyway, it basically just scrapes the excess oil off so you don't get as much oil foaming. You don't have as much oil on the crank splashing around. So yeah, we just need to go through, check all our tolerances, tighten it down, put the rest of it together. So I also installed my pickup tube brace, oil pan. Then we're done with this. Alrighty, got the engine pretty much completed as a long block. We'll still need to prime the oil pump since we have a new pump in there, and a couple other little things. We got most of the little stuff swapped over. Everything seems to be good to go. I want to go ahead, normally I put the accessories on in the car, but I want to go ahead and start getting them on now just to make sure everything's going to fit and be cohesive since we are switching to an F-body setup. So before it had this truck crank pulley which sticks out an inch further, and then it was using these spacers to space the water pump out far enough. It was a really janky setup, not a fan of it. So we put the F-body crank pulley on. We have an F-body water pump, so that should work fine. The tensioner should work fine. We'll have to modify the alternator mounting spacers basically to line that up. And what we need to do as well is put our steam port fitting into the water pump somewhere. So we have these steam ports here. We just need to put our little 1/8 MPT fitting somewhere in the cooling system. So I think I'm just gonna drill and tap right into the water pump. Easy enough. Just got to clean out these metal shavings and we're good. I just don't understand how you even get crappy water pump gaskets like this paper ones. This is the factory gasket. This is one of the amazing things about LS's. All the gaskets are metal with O-ring seals. They work great. You don't have to RTV them. You don't have to mess with it. Paper. Who put, like, why would you do this? These are gonna be too long, aren't they? Yep. So these bolts were obviously longer to work with the water pump spacers, which we're no longer using. I had 4 water pump bolts. Why I didn't have the 6 that I needed, I have no idea. I had 4. Probably took off one of the engines I bought that came with a water pump. I gotta have another pair somewhere. So every engine came with a water pump. 4, not 6, 4. All right, so now we need to figure out how much we need to cut our spacers. So we've got 98.5, and this should be 3 mil. 3.1. 3, so 125, so we need 30 mil spacers. All right, well, it's just a day of needing hardware. I figured there would be some roadblocks when converting to just a full F-body setup. I figured there'd be some stuff I didn't think about that I don't have. Water pump bolts, we almost had, and then the alternator bolts. Because these spacers are now so much shorter, these bolts are way too long, which they're already like borderline too long. But anyway, yeah, need to order some shorter bolts for this, then we'll be good there. We can bolt that on. Same thing, water pump bolts, need to order those, but none of this will hinder us from getting the motor in and getting it started up, so just gonna keep on trucking. Oh, well, so much for that. Dude, what the... Well, I think we've about obliterated this one. All right, well, let's try to get the other one out. If we can get that one out, we can just get a new one of these. I think I might even have one. All right, well, we've got a bit of a dilemma here. So I don't know if you'll be able to see, but basically the puller tool, so this goes in, you tighten this down, it spreads those out. This is supposed to grab the back of the pilot bearing. The problem, well, this is a bushing, but anyway, the problem is this is a brass bushing, so it's just kind of like ripping through the bushing. It's grabbing, but it's just pulling bushing material out. So there is the method everyone talks about where you put grease or toilet paper or bread in here and you shove something that's about the right size in the center and it uses like essentially the hydraulic pressure to force this out. The problem is on an LS you have a freeze plug back here. So you might not push this out, you might just pop the freeze plug in and then you're in even more trouble. So yeah, difficult. You know, I really don't want to risk that. We'd have to probably pull the crank out to repair that. So, I'll have to figure something out. Oh, I broke the tool. Time to resort to other options. Oh no, the top's still stuck. Close. Come on, bud. Ha-ha! Wow. Well, that's going to require some cleanup, but we got it out. That is what matters. I had to use a mix. Drill bits, obviously center punch, drilled holes, and then my original plan, before I drilled the holes, was to use a carbide burr and grind it out, but then I was like, oh, I can drill holes, get most of the way there, and just carbide burr through the last layer. And it worked. We got it out. If there's one thing I've learned in the past few years that I didn't really know before, I didn't have ingrained in me, it's more of a mindset, is that there is always a solution to the problem. There is always some way around it. For a second there, I was like, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do. The pilot bearing tool's not pulling this out, can't do the grease trick because the freeze plug. You know, I'm not sure, and I'm like, there's got to be a way. There's got to be something we can do to get it out. And again, that's just something I've learned that I didn't have before. I used to be like, nope, that's it, it's impossible, you know. So anyway, I don't know, just jibber jabbering. I'm happy I got that out. So we got to run to the store, grab a new one since we destroyed the other one too, and throw it in. Then we can continue on with what we should have been done with by now. Flywheel on, pressure plate, clutch setup, boom, trans, boom, engine in. Car. Get back to it. All right, got our pilot bearing. I put it in the freezer for just a very short time, just to help out a little bit. I found the biggest thing that helps is a little bit of grease, just to kind of reduce the friction. Not a lot. You don't want a ton of it in there, because then you're going to be taking up more space, but just a little bit. that one went in a lot easier than the others didn't come out. Sweet, all right, well, that was easier than expected.
Staying in the same spot.
One thing that did take me some time to learn is that just because the clutch alignment tool is in the clutch and in the pilot bearing does not mean it's lined up. You want to make sure that it slides in and out easily. It can be in there and bound up and it's hard to get in and out. You want it to slide in super easily like that. Otherwise, you'll not have much fun putting your trans on. All right, torque these down, get the trans on. One last check of this guy. Beautiful. Perfect. Back towards the corner. Yeah, there we go. That's it. Good. Hold it first. Okay. Before we drop the engine back in, I'll change these bolts before I forget about it. When we were putting the body kit on, I ran out of these button head Allens, and we had to use hex bolts. Not acceptable, even on this car. All right, that looks a lot better. All right, make it official. Alrighty, drive shaft's in, trans mount's all bolted up. I had to unbolt it to pop the exhaust in. I forgot, you can't get it in without the trans mount down, but that was easy enough. I just had to lower it a little bit. So before we can put the exhaust in, we gotta put the headers in. Before we put the headers in, I wanna start doing some of the wiring, just because it'll be easier to get to. Then we can get the starter in, then we can get the headers in. If I remember right, that's the best order of operations for this. So that's what we're gonna try. We'll drop it down and get back to it. Header's in, bud.
Yeah. I'm just surprised.
I know, I was too, honestly. First time I did, I was like, oh man, I probably should put the engine in like.
Yeah, with them.
Yeah.
Doesn't sit. Yeah, that's dope.
New OEM AC Delco gaskets. Not the junk that was on here.
My hand.
Most of the wiring is hooked up. I've still got to do the starter, and then we got to do the injectors and the coil packs once we get the intake manifold on. At the headers on, fully bolted on. It is amazing to me that this car, it is so easy to install long tubes. Did change the plugs back to the plugs that were in the iron block, because the plugs that were in this engine are for E85, and I think for now we're going to run this engine on pump gas just because this thing doesn't need a ton more power. And I don't really want to deal with the headache of having to get E85 for both cars. It's nice with this car to just put, I don't know, man. I don't know, maybe I'll just run it on E85. I might just run it on E85. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I already have to get E85 for the Miata, so like I always have it, and I always have the cans full of it, and I don't normally mix them. I don't know, I gotta figure that out. Just came into a dilemma as I was talking to you. But anyway, what we need to do now is swap over some intake manifold stuff, our throttle body, some fittings, and we can toss the intake manifold on. Luckily, I saved these EV1 to EV6 injector adapters from when I had the stock ECU set up in my Miata. All right, well, we got a pretty good amount done. I mean, this thing is really close to firing up. We're just missing those water pump bolts and the alternator bolts, which will be here tomorrow. But I got to go get the Miata ready and get it loaded up for the drift event tomorrow as we were driving that. Obviously not this, because this isn't done, but it's pretty close. We should be able to fire it up next video. Like I said, we'll just have to do the oil system. I'm doing like a remote filter cooler setup. I'll explain that when we do that. Button the exhaust up, cooling system, throw those bolts in, belt. I mean, real easy stuff. And we should be able to fire this thing up and drive it around, which I'm excited for because this car sounded pretty good with the stock 5.3 in it, with the long tubes and then the pretty dense muffler. It had a really nice tone, so I'm really curious to hear what it sounds like ripping with the 5.3 with the cam in it and stuff. I think it's going to be pretty rowdy. I'm also excited to see what the car feels like with, 320, 350 wheel versus 250. So hope to see you guys for that. Hope to see you for the drift event tomorrow. But for now, that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.